Well, a hearty shalom to all of you. That is how Jews say hi in Texas. It really is a thrill to be here, and it always is, to see old friends and meet some new friends. But it's an honor as well, particularly this evening, because I was shocked to get the invitation to come and speak on this subject. I had gotten an email or a phone call. Hey, listen, Steve's thinking about you coming down. What's on your mind to want to talk about? I have something of an eccentric mind. So I said, how about the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean and the origins of the American Navy? Now, I didn't hear back for a couple of weeks, and I thought, because we are old friends, Steve is probably just trying to figure out how to walk that back, how to get out of it. This isn't the kind of thing where Steve's saying, yeah, Jeffrey Seif, he's going to come and talk. He doesn't know what I'm going to talk about. And you probably don't as well. You're probably thinking, listen, Jewish pirates of the Caribbean, I got to be here because I dropped the kids off. It'll be over at 8:30. I mean, what is this, for God's sake? If you're wondering, I mean, we had dinner this evening, and I was waiting for Steve to say, Jeff, what is that, for God's sake? I get a sense that I was invited to speak here just because he respects me. And it's born out of an assumption that it's probably going to be something worthwhile if it's coming out of Jeffrey Seif's mouth. And if you're a male of the species, or female as well, but certainly I understand males of the species better. And I know the difference between males and females, by the way. I know that's a delicate issue in today's culture. There's just something about when you feel you're being respected. And I think I'm here this evening on the basis of that. I'm supposed to be here tomorrow night. If I'm not, then it didn't go all that well. What I'd like to do is speak to you about the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. I'd like to begin just with a verse to remind you of. I'm going to pivot to it at the end. In the book Tehillim, in Hebrew, in Psalms, it says in chapter 121, verse 1, you might recall, I'll lift up my eyes to the Lord. From whence does my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. I want to remind you this evening, and I think you're going to see it amply attested this evening, that help sometimes comes from very, very, very unexpected places. I'd like to begin by speaking to you about America's two Revolutionary Wars. I don't know to what extent you're a student of history. I am. I've written a few books on early church history, very interested in historiography. I, among other things, work in television. If you can't sleep tonight at 10 p.m., if you're laying around and watching Daystar Christian television, you'll see a program there called Our Jewish Roots. And I'm doing the third of an 8-part series there called The Faith of Our Fathers. I'm going back and taking a look at colonial America. I'm going to be doing some of that here this evening. I want to remind that not all in colonial America, when this nation began, supported the revolution, the breakaway from Great Britain. Britain imposed this monolith. There was a political structure that was imposed upon colonists. Those benefiting from the old political system preferred maintaining the status quo. In fact, I've looked at the sources and hearing Washington and others express chagrin that it's hard to get individuals to participate in the war effort, and even those that sign up for it. It's militia, it's Minutemen. It's characterized by this ubiquitous decay and enthusiasm. I want to take a look at those wars at the outset. Lack of support from colonial America's elites, that is, those in the colonies that were the landed gentry. They were associated with the political structure. The elites were sadly disinterested. I note that the lack of support was sadly attested in one of the most inglorious moments in the American Revolution, the debacle at Valley Forge. Now, you may or may not know about that. I do. I'm from Pennsylvania originally. I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as soon as I could, so relax. So I'm from Harrisburg. And I know Pennsylvania, Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, is 18 miles away from Philadelphia. In Valley Forge, from December the 7th, 1777 till June 19th, 1978, George Washington and his militia were decimated by the lack of clothing, expended food staples, and depleted financial resources. They were in Valley Forge. They'd run out of ammunition as well. The Revolutionary Army, they were game to throw off the yoke of a political structure that was indifferent toward them. Individuals that mobilized energies to throw off that yoke. They wanted to breathe. They wanted to be free. They wanted to pursue their own destiny. They were ill-equipped. They were broke. Now, interestingly, the story in Valley Forge where they were getting killed by the winter, it's 18 miles away from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I lived in Philadelphia for a season. Philadelphia was the banking capital of the New World. Now, you have something here where here's this revolutionary army in the New World, right up against Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Everyone's looking the other way. Very, very tragic. The colonial elites weren't helpful. The question was whether deplorables with lesser status and stations in life would rally for the American dream. The Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Morris, sent a dispatch to a Spanish Jewish financier in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, named Chaim Solomon. Now, Spencer was virulently anti-Semitic. He didn't like Jews. Washington was nudging him because he knew of Solomon, who was a broker, who was nudging him. He didn't want to do it. Finally, out of desperation, he did. He sent dispatches to the synagogue, Mikveh Yisrael, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, on Yom Kippur, which is the highest holy day in the Jewish world where Jews are not allowed to do any work. And what happens is these dispatches interrupt the service, and they go in, and they give Robert Morris the letter, the request. They give Robert Morris's request to Chaim Solomon. Solomon looks at it, and he goes over to the rabbi. An offering was taken, and financing was secured immediately. The non-elites who saw hope in the promise of the American dream delivered. Now, I want you to understand these Jews were the deplorables in the New World. Individuals who came over from the Old World, marginalized because they didn't live within the same philosophical and political world as the regnant powers. They thought different thoughts. They were different. They weren't minded to be acquiescent. They were minded to hold on to their world and worldview, subsequent to which they were forever beat around in Europe. Individuals came over to the New World for the hope that was the American dream. Those that were well established in the New World, they were tethered to the existing bureaucracy and political structures, were more than happy to keep the status quo. But these deplorables rallied, and the net result is that the revolution was financed. Now, there's various attestations to this historically. You're looking at a statue there with George Washington in the middle and Robert Morris, the Secretary of the Treasury, on one side and Chaim Solomon on the other. More interesting for my purposes, you're looking at a postage stamp that the U.S. Postal Service minted in 1776 in honor of the 200th anniversary of the American Revolution. And there's a picture on there of Chaim Solomon. It says his name, and right next to it, it says financial hero. And now what was interesting about this stamp is, unlike other stamps that just have the sticky side on the reverse side, it's printed on the reverse side, a notation to the fact that thanks to Solomon, the American Revolution was stimulated. Not just him, but him and his associates. It's interesting, I wanted to remind on the outset, we haven't gotten to the pirates, the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean, but I want to remind on the outset that sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Chaim Solomon, for his part, donated his entire fortune, and the Continental Congress couldn't repay him. He died poor. Some believe that Charles Thomson, the Secretary of the Continental Congress, in 1782 arranged the seal that you may well be familiar with of the United States of America. You'll see that American bird, and there's a cloud above it, the Shekinah glory that guided the Hebrews through miraculous experiences in the Older Testament. And inside are 13 stars that represent the 13 colonies arranged in the symbol of the Star of David. The Continental Congress could not repay the debt. There's a cogent argument, however, that they found a way to say thank you nonetheless. In fact, if you look on the back of your $1 bills, you'll find the very seal that's being described here. I want to move on to remind that there was another patriot, John Paul Jones, who once said, "I have not yet begun to fight." If you can recall the origins of the American Navy, John Paul Jones, you got to love that intransigence, that boldness, right? He's going to take on the British. Him and his 5 ships. That was the extent of the U.S. Navy. The fledgling country could barely afford to outfit, feed, and support infantry. Never mind Jones' Navy, big ships and the like. They couldn't even afford to feed. They couldn't afford to supply muskets. What did the government do? How did America rally and take on the biggest, most respectable, formidable navy in the world? The British Navy. It was said, and for good reason, Britannica rules the waves. Oh, Britannica. We know that America, the Americans won on land, but at sea with 5 ships. How on God's earth did that happen? You're going to see that help comes from very unexpected places. The origin of this revolutionary navy, the History Channel, did a piece entitled "How a Rogue Navy of Pirate Ships Helped Win the American Revolution." It was noted how an armada of 2,000 privately owned U.S. ships, serviced principally by privateers, disrupted British shipping and turned the tide of the war. Now, when we think of pirate, it's a blanket term. There's different words. It's like when people think of Christians or evangelicals, there's different types. Unless you're within the culture, you don't know the types. We think of pirate. Well, there's pirates, there's privateers, there's buccaneers, there's slang terms, swashbucklers. There's different nomenclature, there's different language. Privateers were pirates. What happened? According to the National Park Service, the Continental Congress issued 1,700 letters of marque, with various states issuing hundreds more. Benjamin Franklin, the ambassador to France, when he was there, gave them out like candy. What's a letter of marque? Those who owned vessels were approached, and they were given a license. If they wanted to outfit their boats, and they could then attack British ships, and will split the bounty 50-50 between those who are engaged in the enterprise, and the rest goes into the coffers of continental America. That was the terms of endearment. Actually, the U.S. government said, keep it all. So if you look at the founding of the Navy, with thousands of boats now, ships, they didn't have all the regalia and all the military paraphernalia of the British elite Navy. But they outfitted them with guns. These are what we might call middle-class people today, or blue-collar people just kind of entering into the middle class. They're entrepreneurs. They had a ship, and they outfitted them. And these were the ones that went forth. Now, some of the ships have very interesting names. Very, very interesting names. Queen Esther, Jerusalem, Shield of Abraham, and they were captained by Jewish pirates. In fact, there were famous rabbis that were Jewish privateers, interestingly. Individuals who were disenfranchised in the old economy. The old political structures just threw them to the margins. They were the deplorables. But they didn't want to be the deplorables. They just wanted to breathe. And individuals were not looking at landed gentry. We're just looking at people that see hope for themselves socially, economically, and they want to throw the dice. They want to roll the dice against an uncertain future. This is the beginnings of the U.S. Navy. These people throw themselves in as privateers. Actually, Jones was upset because he's trying to enlist people to be sailors in the U.S. Navy, but those that sign up as privateers are getting a better deal. They can keep half the booty. It's a better arrangement. And he expresses some chagrin over that. 600 British ships were destroyed during the war. 600, and it took more than John Paul Jones 5 to get that job done. Helped by these regular non-elite patriots, America won the first major contest. There were two Revolutionary Wars, actually. People are just familiar with the first. The struggle with the British didn't end with their surrender at Yorktown, however. There was another fight and another story, which gets us closer to the Caribbean story. John Trumbull's painting, The Surrender of Lord Cornwallis in 1781, is in display at the rotunda of the United States Capitol. You might be familiar with it when you look at it. Though to be sure, it marked the end of a conflict. It didn't mark the end of America's war with the British. That conflict was decided later in the Battle of New Orleans. Now we're getting to the Gulf. And that battle, the success of it, is attributed to a Jewish pirate named Jean Lafitte. Now I want to get to, it's popularized in modern culture, the pirates of the Caribbean. There's a responsible argument when you look historically at the pirates of the Caribbean, to be sure, the pirate that had the greatest heist in history. His name was Moses Henriquez. He landed the equivalent in today's dollars of $1 billion in silver and gold. Talk about making off with plunder. But if you look not just at one contest, if you look at, was there a fleet here? In the Gulf world, it was. And they had in the vicinity of 80 ships. And Jean Lafitte was the admiral. I want to get to him in a moment. Once again, you're going to see that the old political system raised its hoary head. I want to speak to the Revolutionary War number 2, Act 2. The first conflict was decided People are familiar with Washington and land forces. But in 1812, the British rallied again, and they attacked Louisiana. It's the Great Battle of New Orleans. On August the 10th, 1814, the British authorized an invasion by the mouth of the Mississippi River. Forces were ordered to gather in Jamaica November the 20th to restart the war. Now, Jamaica at the time was a British holding. While making preparations for the war, the British realized they had a very serious problem with its execution. I want you to look at how do you approach this? The British realized they didn't know exactly where and how to attack. The campaign was organized by Major General Sir Edward Pakenham. Concerned he'd ground his ocean fleet in narrow and shallow waterways, he turned to the famous Jewish commander of the pirate fleet in the Caribbean for intelligence, Jean Lafitte. The question is, how am I going to invade? Where are we going to go? Well, there's this pirate, he's in trouble with the Americans, and maybe he'll want to deal with us. So the British approached Lafitte, who had a blacksmith shop as a front shop in New Orleans. Spies approached him, and he agreed to serve as a spy for the British so to be able to guide their troops, guide their ships through the narrow waterways. But what Lafitte did, is he told the British he was going to work for them, but he was a double agent. He went and spoke to someone else named Andrew Jackson, who was a general at the time and not a president. What he did is he went and he got in cahoots with him. Now, before getting into the particulars of that struggle, before getting to Lafitte and the Second War, I'd like to consider the Gulf world itself. I want to take a look at Old Spain, Spanish Jewry, and the Jews in the Gulf. Not just the Jews on the ships in the Gulf. We're going to look at this in a moment. If you look at this part of the world, when individuals came here, you've heard of Six Flags over Texas. Okay, what does that mean? There were different flags that flew over here. I mean, I drove down here today from Dallas. I drove down, and there was Leon County, there's Leona, there's Centerville. What's Centerville? Well, Centerville is the center of Leon County. Do you know that when this was a Spanish holding, it was called Nuevo Leon originally, and it went all the way out to Amarillo, down to Monterrey, Mexico. And the governor of the colony, Luis Carvajal de Sueva, was a Jew. Now, we can talk about the founding of what we call Texas. I'm going to get to that in a moment. I want to take a look. Pilgrims, we're familiar with the story of how pilgrims fled to North America to escape King James. We're familiar with that. The Puritans, the Pilgrims, they were looking for religious freedom. We know the story of the Europeans that came over to the New World. But before the Europeans ever came over to the New World, the Northern Europeans, this part of the world was discovered by the Southern Europeans from the Iberian Peninsula. Before the Pilgrims came, many who came to the Caribbean, Central, and South America were fleeing Ferdinand and Isabella and the oppressive monolithic political oppression that was Old Spain. Now, I have some pictures there of the Inquisition. What had happened is Islam had overrun the Iberian Peninsula, but there was a retaking of the peninsula. It was gradual, starting from the north in France and moving down, and Castile, Aragon, Leon, Portugal. Finally, the last to fall to the Europeans was Granada, subsequent to which Ferdinand and Isabella, being persuaded by the church, we're going to make this a Christian country, a Catholic country. Those who don't subscribe to the new religion are out. The Inquisition was enacted. People are fleeing. They're looking to get out of Dodge. Hundreds of thousands of people flee. Pressed by the Inquisition to get rid of people who didn't subscribe to the regnant political ideology, after the fall of Granada in January of 1492 and the consequential securing of the Iberian Peninsula in total, Ferdinand and Isabella enacted the Alhambra Decree in March, ordering Jews to leave in 3 months. Jews were kicked out of Dodge. The very day when Christopher Columbus set sail for the New World, he's followed out by ships, the last of the Jews that are leaving Spain. Christopher Columbus and others of Jewish extract left Spain on the very day. The lesser-known figure today is the linguist who accompanied him, Luis de Torres. His name was actually Yosef ben Levi, Ivri, and he was a Jew. In fact, there were a number of Jewish people on Columbus's boat, and there's a cogent argument that Columbus himself was of Jewish extract, at least partially. That's really beyond the purpose of what I want to get into here. I do want to note, however, the famous voyage of discovery, so-called, wasn't helped along simply by adventurers and fortune seekers. Parroting a CNN article, the Times of Israel recently noted, and I quote, "Columbus' voyage was not, as is commonly believed, funded by the deep pockets of Queen Isabella, but rather by 2 Jewish conversos and another prominent Jew." Conversos were people of Jewish extract who ostensibly converted to Catholicism to escape the Inquisition initially. Well, the Inquisition came after them. Luis de Santander and Gabriel Sanchez advanced an interest loan of 17,000 ducats from their own pockets to help pay for the voyage, as did Don Isaac Abarbanel, a rabbi and Jewish statesman. Now, what prompted the support? You find Jews fleeing en masse to the New World over here. You know, the former Prime Minister of Israel, who may be the next Prime Minister again, Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, his father, a famous professor in Israel, argued that in Central America and South America, if Hispanic people took DNA tests, they'd find there were 30 million Hispanic people that are of Jewish extract. There was such a prolific infusion of Jews coming over to the New World. It's something of a lost story. I'm going to show you some of it in a moment. Columbus' fleet wasn't the only fleet leaving, as I'd mentioned. The Jews fled then. You're looking here at a map of the Iberian Peninsula. All those cities were vacated, major cities. If you look at Spain, Spain was the intellectual center of the Jewish world. All the great Jewish philosophical, theological writings were written in Spain. Fascinating story. It was vacated. Many of these Jews, as I noted, were merchants and mariners, and once settled in the New World, many took to a new but related line of work. These Jews come over here to the New World. They're merchants. They're mariners. They know all that. What do you think they got into? I'm showing you some tombstones in Jamaica. Do you know that 20% of Jamaica was constituted by Jews? If you look at those tombstones closely, you'll see, well, you wouldn't necessarily note that the text is in Hebrew. It is. But can you see the skull and the crossbones? The Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. You can go to Jamaica today. Actually, Jamaica was gifted to Columbus by the Spanish crown, unlike other holdings over here to the New World. He arranged it that there would be no litmus test for acceptability in the new colony, which means no one asked your religion. Columbus set it up in a way like that to be a free colony where people can come. 20% were Jews. It's interesting. By the way, probably the most famous Jamaican that you might know is Bob Marley. You might want to Google Bob Marley singing Passover songs. Yo, man. Never mind him, his son You can find him on YouTube over in Israel with his Israeli wife. There's the religion of Israel, but then in Hebrew what's called Zare Israel, the seed of Israel. Just individuals that come from genetically. I was lecturing not long ago. I was invited to speak at a college in Harare, Zimbabwe, to do a class at an Assemblies of God Bible College there to the Lumba tribe, Africans of Jewish extract. Netanyahu argued that if you come over here to the New World, individuals are, there's many more Jews than people even realize. Now, talk about the New World. Never mind old Spain. What you're seeing here is a map of New Spain, so-called. Columbus came to this New World. Now, it wasn't as developed as you're seeing there now. You're looking and seeing the colonies, which were on the eastern seaboard, but you'll see there's Spanish Louisiana, and then you go west. Columbus got a foothold in the Caribbean. Many Jewish adventurers and refugees who followed carved out space for themselves in the newly acquired Spanish territories, New Spain so-called. Texas itself, as I mentioned, was initially settled and governed by Spanish Jews expanding north from a port city in today's Mexico. I want to speak briefly about the origins of Nuevo Leon, and then I want to look a little more at the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. Luis Carvajal de la Sueva sailed to the New World in 1567 from Portugal, fleeing the Inquisition. He became a magistrate in the Gulf town Tampes in Mexico. He, with a cadre of Portuguese Jewish escapees, secured authorization to establish a new settlement in Nuevo Leon. They pushed up north. Part of it is the Inquisition's coming, and people are heading north. They want to get out of the big cities, because the old political philosophy is going to catch them and stomp them out. He secures permission to go north. Carvajal became the governor. His position as the governor, however, didn't stop the intolerant Inquisition from arresting him for, quote, observing the dead law of Moses, end of quote. He was burned at the stake in 1590 for not embracing the regnant philosophy. Him and 162 members of his family, 2 escaped. One went back to Europe, became a physician, another became a rabbi. 2 escaped. Tragic story. Now, Texas is located in Nuevo Leon. Once upon a time, this world that we inhabit was being developed by people, the deplorables. They're looking for some breathing space for a new world. They're wanting to escape a kind of political oppression that didn't make room for them, that cast aspersions on them. Now, in his doctoral dissertation at Tulane University, the state historian of New Mexico went into greater detail on the story of Texas beginnings and to Jewish contributions associated with it. I just want to mention that here. Stanley Horde's, his book, To the Ends of the Earth, which unpacks the story in more detail than I'm just describing here in brief, goes into the particulars. It's published by Columbia University Press. We're looking at a reputable publishing house. We're looking at a reputable dissertation. We're looking at a reputable person who is the state historian in New Mexico, so-called. Where do you think that name came from? Now, having considered adventures on land, I want to push this to its conclusion by looking at some ventures at sea. And what I want to do with you again is just briefly revisit the story of the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. And I want to remind, by the way, that sometimes help comes from unlikely places. It's like Oral Roberts University was in a pickle. They needed some money. There was a guy, he wasn't even a Christian. He gave him $2 million some years ago. Sometimes, my help comes from the Lord. Different people are stirred in different ways to do different things. The Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. I'll kind of get to the point here. I'm about 7 minutes till I'm done, and I want to look at something of the unknown heroes. Now, there's the real pirates of the Caribbean. I have the old Jack Black picture there, and there's a picture of Jean Lafitte. Jean Lafitte. I mentioned him earlier. I want to talk to you about him a little. Jewish pirates like Jean Lafitte had an abiding history in the New World. Jewish privateers assisted in the American Revolution. Their ships were registered with names like the Prophet Samuel, Queen Esther, the Shield of Abraham, and staffed by Jews. I've already mentioned that. A Jewish pirate handed America its decisive victory over the British in the 1812 conflagration. Now, I want to get into the story here in brief, that the British, though defeated by Washington on land, came back. They still, they had some spring in their step. They wanted to give another bid for it. What happened is Napoleon sold what's called the Louisiana Purchase to the Americans, but the British didn't recognize Napoleon's land deal. And what the British wanted to do, they tried on the eastern seaboard. It didn't work. They wanted to come westward, but they needed to come up through New Orleans. Whoever controls the entrance way to the Mississippi has all that access, all that movement. That's the highway. That's how you move troops and supplies and all the rest. The Battle of 1812, the British galvanized their energies and made a bid for it. Now, privateers helped America in time of war. I've already mentioned that. After the Revolutionary War was settled with considerable pirate help, Napoleon sold 827,000 square miles to the United States in 1803, and I've already mentioned the British didn't recognize it and used their chagrin as a pretext for a second war. The U.S. once again formally declared war with England on June 18, 1812, and the dogs of war were unleashed. While preparing for their assault, British spies approached Lafitte and offered him $30,000 in a captaincy in the Royal Navy for his assistance. They needed help getting in. They didn't know how to do it. He feigned cooperation, but not sympathetic to the old oppressive regimes. Lafitte turned and offered aid to General Andrew Jackson in defense of New Orleans. He led the British into a trap. Not only did he lead them into a trap, but the American forces that came to bushwhack them, their ammunition, their gunpowder was soggy. They're not used to the environment. Not only did Lafitte provide intelligence and stealthily lead the British into the trap, but he provided gunpowder. So that way the American forces could execute. He led the British into a trap. Lafitte and his men fought with distinction. Jackson personally commended Lafitte as one of the ablest men of the battle, and President James Madison issued a public proclamation on the pirates' behalf. Lafitte was rewarded with a tract of land in the West and a governorship there, a place that is now known as Galveston. Now, I have a picture here. I'll get to it in a second. I want you to look at the Mississippi. After the war, when General Andrew Jackson, later President Jackson, won the Battle of New Orleans with Lafitte's help, the Mississippi was secured as an American holding, which in turn facilitated westward expansion, and with it, the development of what became known as the state of Texas. That Texas was west but it's once you have that new westward movement, and the westward movement was secured on the heels of the successful execution of the Battle of 1812, which was won because of Jean Lafitte's participation in the endeavor. That opens up the Western world. You've heard the term manifest destiny. Go west, young man. And you have this westward movement. deplorables, individuals that are marginalized, they're kicked to the curb, they don't have a stake in the current scheme of things. They want to live, they want to breathe. They line up with others that can contribute toward the freedom that resonates with their own hearts. And you have individuals rise to the fore, strange heroes, a strange story. There's a historical marker that marks the spot in the new western region in Galveston, Texas, where Lafitte headquarters, from where he administered the affairs of his fledgling port city at the time. This world wasn't inhabited. Even Houston, by the way, came 20, 25 or so years after the 1812 battle. You have movement out to this part of the world. Galveston, there wasn't much there, but it was given to Lafitte. And there's a sign there. You can't see it, but you can see some ruins. And there's a historical marker there that tells the story in brief that I'm describing to you in brief about Jean Lafitte, this pirate who was forgiven his debts by the president because of his contribution to the war effort. And there's a sketch there of Lafitte as well. Actually, whenever you put a presentation together, you have to decide what you're not going to show and what you're not going to tell. There's all kinds of landmarks I wanted to show you, plaques that are dedicated to Jean Lafitte, but I don't have time. If you're interested, you might like the book, The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, that I named this after. Ed Kinzer is the author. It's not a long paperback book. He's a Jewish guy. And actually, I first learned the story of the Jewish pirates in the Caribbean in Israel. I'm in and out of Israel all the time. I was there in the spring. I'll be there again in October. I work in television. My wife is there now, who, by the way, gives her regards. She wished she could be with us, but she can't. In any case, the book you might find interesting. In summary, we considered how deplorables, individuals disenfranchised in and by the old system, rallied behind the dream that was America and overcame seemingly insurmountable odds. We looked at piracy, privateering, examined the Spanish Jewish pirates of the Caribbean, and then noted how oddly, in many respects, those who were displaced by Spanish tyranny became heroes in the American struggle against tyranny in their day. With all that said, a question remains. So what? So what? Jeffrey, listen, if it's a high school history class, we get it. It's church. It's church. What does this have to do with anything? Well, I kind of hinted at it. I was explicit and tacit. Explicitly, I wanted to remind with a verse. I will lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. And sometimes that help comes from unexpected places. I was explicit about that. And tacit, that is, I'm inferring. I think there's relevance to the story because in so many ways, I'm relegated to the status of a deplorable today. The marginalized ilk, those that just don't embrace the regnant philosophy. If you can't tell the difference between a man and a woman, who are you to tell me anything? There's this recalcitrance, those who refuse to bow the knee. There's a sense in which explicitly, the biblical text talks to us about help coming from interesting places. Tacitly, I wanted to kind of interweave into this narrative something that makes it something of a parable for our own moment. A few things on the quick and I'm done. First, I believe we do well to remember this one thing as we go through the things that are uniquely our things. That is, if Psalms 121 verse 1 is to be believed, our help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. I think that's a very important verse. I was once paralyzed from the neck down, very, very sick. I'm 67 now. I like to spend 4 or 5 days a week in the gym throwing weights around. I couldn't pick my own body up. And there was a friend of mine, musician, Paul Wilbur, who sang a song, I Lift Up My Eyes, and I had a tape recorder there. I could move my finger, and I'd hit play. It would play it, and then I'd push rewind over and over again. And I remember the song, I Will Lift Up My Eyes. And the reason why it meant something to me is it's the only thing I could lift. Sometimes it just gets that bad. Sometimes it just gets that bad. I believe we do well to remember this one thing, that as we go through our things, that there really is help that comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. Secondly, I believe we do well to remember that the struggle against tyranny is an ongoing struggle. You know, there's a Hebrew expression, dor lador, from generation to generation. You know, if God has a call in your life, then hell has an assignment against you. There's a spiritual component that doesn't come out in the news, but it comes out in the good news. And we wrestle not against flesh and blood. There is that component. I say, mindful that help comes from the maker of heaven and earth, let's be vigilant and boldly stand up to tyrannical power structures that currently reign on earth. Again, secondly, I believe that we get a little bit of chutzpah. Let me hear you say chutzpah. It's guts. There's a Jewish term, chazak. Let me hear you say chazak. Chazak, it means be strong. It takes that sometime. Thirdly, let's stand together against oppression in our day. I want to mention that Christianity is a team sport. Talk about ships, boats, you know, fellowship. Christian church is a fellowship. And if you look at the old church buildings, I studied, among other things, early Christian art and architecture and been to all the churches, the major churches in Europe. If you look at the churches, they used to be very long and narrow. And if you look up, the ceiling's vaulted. It's intentionally made to look like a boat upside down. And it kind of harks back to the sense in which when someone becomes a Christian, they come into the boat, the term fellowship. There's a lot of shipping language. There's fellowship, courtship, partnership, relationship. Human experience is full of ship. There's a lot of shipping going on, you know, and I don't care about your dirty minds. I'm just talking. You know, what happens if you have your partner in life is called your mate. You ever heard the term first mate? These are naval terms. I'm so into this Navy, Stu Johnson's looking at me regretting that he went into the Air Force. Yeah, I can tell. Look, I missed it. I should have done the Navy. I can see it all over his face. He'll tell me about it tonight. You know, so you have your relationship, and you say, well, how's the relationship going? Well, it's going on an even keel. You ever heard the term before, an even keel? The keel is what runs under the boat, and all the wood connects to it. It runs along the bottom. I mean, if you look at relationships, ship, Christianity is a team sport. I want to remind you that fellowship entails a bunch of fellows in the same ship. Fellowship, some kind of rowing together. That there's no way, the battles that we fight, there's no way to win them alone at the end of the day. Part of being Christian is coming out of alienation and deciding to throw energies together into some kind of cooperative venture. Yeah, there's the loss of some autonomy in that, but the gains are much greater, to be sure. Great people are not loners, and great battles are never won alone. I want to thank you for affording me the opportunity to share a little bit about the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. It was a little different. If I'm not here tomorrow night, Regal didn't like it. But he looks happy, best I can tell, but I'm nervous to look. But what I want to leave you with, again, is the reminder that help comes from interesting places. If you're at a place in life where you don't know where it's coming from, that doesn't mean it's not coming. All that it means is, as you sit here right now, you don't know where it's coming from. but you know the Lord who made heaven and earth. I have some books in the back if you're interested. There's a little book table back there. I won't discuss them now. I've gone a little late. Thank you so much for affording me the opportunity to share. Pastor Steve.